Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, and the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Today, the committee is resuming its study on sexual misconduct within the Canadian Armed Forces. So let me make a few comments for our witnesses. When you're ready to speak, you can click on your microphone icon to activate your mic, and all comments should be addressed through the chair. If you would like to have interpretation in the video conference, there's a button at the bottom, and you can choose English or French or what is being spoken. And when you are speaking, please speak slowly and clearly for our interpreters. And when you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. So now I'd like to welcome our witness today. We have the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal, Brigadier General Simon Trudeau. Bienvenue. Vous avez 5 minutes pour votre commentaire et vous pouvez commencer immédiatement.
Please do begin. Bonjour.
Brigadier General Simon Trudeau. I am the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal and Commander of the Canadian Forces Military Police Group, a position I've held since May of 2018. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about the important role that the Provost Marshal plays in the Canadian Armed Forces and the work of my organization related to the very important subject you are studying in this committee. I will provide as much information as possible, noting that I will not be able to provide comments or details on active investigations. With over 1,800 personnel, the Military Police Group is among the 10 largest police services in Canada. We provide professional policing, security, and detention services to the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces across the full spectrum of military operations in Canada and abroad. I'm extremely proud of the women and men that serve into the Military Police Group. These are professional police officers, and I want to take this opportunity to recognize their outstanding contributions to safeguard our bases and wings across Canada and support Canadian Armed Forces operations worldwide. The Canadian Forces National Investigation Service, the CFNIS, is an independent unit under my direct command, responsible for investigating, reporting, and laying charges in cases of serious service and criminal offenses and sensitive matters within national defense, including complaints of sexual misconduct. Like any police service, we adapt based on recommendations from outside experts and best practices. In response to the Deschamps Report recommendations, the CFNIS established sexual offense response teams, known as SORT. Since 2016, these teams of dedicated investigators have provided subject matter expertise on conducting sexual offense investigations. SORT teams increase the ability of the CFNIS to protect and support victims of sexual misconduct by identifying, investigating, and helping prosecute persons found responsible for criminal sexual offenses. The CFNIS also operates its own victim services program, which provides assistance to victims of crime by referring them to appropriate resources and ensures victims stay informed throughout the investigative and court processes. Last year, we took a decision to staff the CFNIS Victim Services Program with full-time civilian positions to ensure those victim services are optimized and victims feel safe and supported. While I do report to the Vice Chief of Defense Staff for the overall management of the military police program, our investigations are carried out independently to ensure investigative integrity and due process for both the victims and the subjects. The Provost Marshal remains an independent actor within the military justice system, and we ensure that the women and men of the military police and CFNIS have the support and resources to fulfill their core policing mandate. As a police chief, I want to assure members of the committee and all the NDCAF personnel that they can be confident in the independence of our process and the professional capabilities of the military police. We are a learning organization, continuously striving to improve our processes to better support victims and serve the defense community. And I want to encourage anyone who is thinking of coming forward to do so, knowing that our organization will be there to ensure due process. I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you and welcome your questions.
Very good. Then we'll begin our round of questionings with Ms. Sahota for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, General, for being here and for your presentation. So you spoke about investigations. So my questions are gonna be in line with that. How do you know when to begin an investigation?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So we will begin an investigation if a complaint is made to the military police or the CFNIS. We can also become aware of an issue to be investigated as part of an ongoing investigation where you find other aspects that need to be investigated. But it can also be directed by myself, and it can also be directed by the CO CFNIS.
Okay. Can someone make you aware of possibility of wrongdoing without evidence and you look into the matter?
So if I understand your question is, can someone refer an allegation or a concern to the military police? Of course, anybody can make a complaint or refer an allegation to the military police. And at that point, it is assessed if the matter requires investigation, and we will gather the facts, analyze the evidence, and lay charges as required.
So what if the possibility of wrongdoing is there, but there's no evidence at that point? Would you look into the matter?
So any allegations or complaints referred to the military police is investigated in a comprehensive and deliberate way, and it's a process. And in the process of gathering facts and analyzing the evidence, there was a determination at the end of the investigative process, for example, if charges are warranted or not.
And who determines if a matter is worthy of investigation?
For those complaints referred to us, to the military police, then it's assessed by the military police if an allegation is warranted a police investigation. A matter could be referred to the military police that would be better investigated or looked after by the chain of command, for example, or another process in the Canadian Armed Forces.
So how is it determined when an investigation has been fully investigated?
Thank you for the question. So when the investigations are comprehensive, it's a process I explained before. So all investigation in all cases go through a rigorous vetting and quality control process, and quality control is assured that way.
Can you speak a little bit to the review process to evaluate the effectiveness and thoroughness of an investigation?
Yes, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So the complaint is made, it's assigned to an investigator. The investigator goes through his investigative process, and there is regular interaction with the different supervisory levels. And then there is a rigorous process within the CFNIS to review every aspect of an investigation, from the investigation plan to the investigation itself, and to the determination at the end if charges are required or not.
The media has reported that investigations under the purview of the Canadian Forces National Investigation Services has been, and I quote, interfered with by senior officers. Is that possible?
So thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So the CFNIS is completely independent from the chain of command. And also, as the Provost Marshal, it was clear in 2011, the CDS amended the command and control structure of the military police and adjusted the authorities, responsibilities, and accountabilities of the Provost Marshal. And they were pretty explicit regarding the CFPM having full command of all MPs involved in policing duty and functions. And also, as the head of the military police, the position of the CFPM is independent from the chain of command.
Typically, what are the ranks of the members assigned to your team who conduct investigation?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So it will range from master corporals to sergeants to warrant officers, and you can also have MWOs, and there are some officers also within the structure.
Are there protocols for what rank you assign to what investigations?
There's no specific protocol. It depends on the investigative expertise and an experience in certain investigations, ranging the whole gamut of investigations that the CFNIS investigates.
As the Canadian Forces, Marshal, you're a Brigadier General. How does that affect your ability to investigate allegations against generals and admirals?
It does not, as indicated in my opening statements and a few moments ago. I'm independent from the chain of command, so we do investigate. It's a process. We investigate regardless of rank or status, and all investigations are conducted the same way, regardless, as I said, of your rank or status.
All right, and now we'll go to Ms. Dillon for 6 minutes.
Good morning, Brigadier General. I'm going to start with a question about in 2017, the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service conducted a review of sexual assault cases concluded as unfounded between 2010 and 2016. Can you please tell us what led to this internal review?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. This was launched, so we called it the Sexual Assault Review Program. It was launched in 2018, and it was as a result of articles, I believe, came out in the Globe and Mail that unfounded sexual assault cases were regularly not coded properly by police services. So what we did is we looked at a model from an external review team to review our cases. So we had 126 unfounded coded sexual assault cases ranging from 2010 to 2018. And we set up an external review team to review those cases independently. And the members of the external review team were comprised of a victim advocate, a civilian prosecutor with experience in sexual assaults, a trauma care nurse. We had a representative of the SMRC and also a representative of the RCMP. And over the course of the review, the RT commented on that the investigators developed very good rapport with the victims. And that kind of validated also for us the training that was proactively adopted by the NIS in 2016, trauma-informed interviewing. So it was a successful model for us, calling the external review team, and it's a model that we can replicate when required.
Thank you for elaborating on that. I wanted to know further to that. You mentioned that it's because they were not coded properly. Can you talk to us a little bit about the coding process and what it entails? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I'm gonna try. I'm not an expert in those coding offense, but I'll try to speak broadly. So the Canadian Centre of Justice Statistics have a system of coding offenses, and following the unfounded cases reviewed by many police services, the CCJS, as we call it, kind of reviewed how offenses are coded. So when police report statistics, there's a specific uniform code report that needs to be assigned to every offense.
Okay, and there was error when it came to recording that, I guess.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. There was some general error, I think, from a misunderstanding at the time what unfounded meant. And that's what led to some cases being coded unfounded, but they were not really unfounded.
Okay, and based on the internal review of 179 unfounded cases, 23 were identified for further investigation. What does the outcome of this review tell you about how these cases were being investigated to begin with?
So it's hard for me to get into specifics of the 26, But what it said is that when the external review came in, there were aspects because of the coding that needed further review. But we learned some valuable lesson, and we received some good advice from the external review team from policy development, training development, and other advice to kind of refine some of our processes, in particular to sexual assaults investigation. So we saw it as a learning experience and really as a good opportunity to consult broadly with external experts on how to get better in our investigations.
And how does the secondary investigation process take place? And what are some of the updated criteria for investigations?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Could you clarify? I'm not sure I understand your question.
Okay, so of the 179 unfounded cases, for example, 23 were identified for further investigation. How did the secondary investigation process take place? What were some of the criteria to allow these 23 cases to be cited for further investigation and more clarification?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So I don't know the specifics, but certainly when they were recommended for further investigative processes, they would be assigned to an investigator who would do a complete review of the file and then address the elements that were found that maybe required additional investigation, and then their investigation was reopened and completed as per CFNIS protocols.
So I have 30 seconds left. I just wanted to ask, with this external review, you said you got some productive advice and good feedback between the old procedure and the ones the one that was reviewed. Can you please tell us a little bit the biggest marked differences, I guess, in 15 seconds? Thank you.
The biggest marked differences for us was certainly on the coding and making sure that we really use the right coding for the offenses. But also what we did from a policy perspective is now any unfounded cases, final reports must be signed by the CO of the unit and reviewed by the CO. So there's an extra quality control and oversight, let's say, into those cases that are coded unfounded.
Excellent. Maintenant,
Great. Ms. Larouche, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Brigadier General, for being here. We are looking into how victims can be better supported, how women can take their place in the army. That's the feminist standpoint. You spoke about the process, and you spoke about collaboration and communication. How is the communication carried out between the Armed Forces Ombudsman, the military police, and you as Canadian Forces Provost Marshal? How is the communication carried out when there's a complaint? Yes, thank you for the question. There is no official relationship between the Ombudsman and my office. But like any organization, the Ombudsman can refer a complaint or the elements of a complaint to the military police or to the CFNIS. And then we would determine whether an investigation is required. What type of assessment do you carry out to determine that? When we receive a complaint or an allegation, be it from the military police or CFNIS, we assess whether the information meets the threshold for a police investigation, because it may be that the information doesn't meet the threshold required to trigger an investigation. We're trying to understand what The problems are with the process of signaling problems and what can be added to the process of pointing out a complaint or making a complaint against someone. Do people know where that complaint should be directed? Do women know that? Well, it's important for me as the chief of the military police that members of the national of DND or the Canadian Armed Forces know where to direct their complaints. And that's why we have our contact information on web pages. It's very easy to find. I think it would also be an advantage. Well, my team and I have talked about this at length to provide ways of communicating more, informing armed forces members of how they can reach us, either to come talk to us or to refer a complaint. Because there is a problem regarding communications, as you've said. From my standpoint, from the police side of things, I can say that when information is reported to us, well, that is, people do know how to do that, although the process can always be improved. Regarding victims' need to identify themselves, what information do they need to provide when they want to take the process further, or when they want to know where to direct their complaints and what the next step is? Thank you for the question. You mean if a victim wishes to remain anonymous? Yes. Does the victim have to identify herself, for example, to the office of the Privy Council or elsewhere? What information does the victim have to provide? Does the victim have to identify herself and provide identifying information? You were on mute. Oh, I'm sorry. A victim can lay a complaint anonymously without identifying herself. So, in your view, the faults in the complaints process, what errors were a problem in the process of complaints that were laid for sexual harassment or sexual assault? In the system, well, what's important for me is for people to trust the process and for them to know how they can report something to the military police and submit a complaint. There is an aspect that isn't always known. Victims can reach a liaison officer at the military police. We have someone with a lot of experience, and victims or people who wish to make a complaint will remain anonymous. The liaison officer will explain the investigation process and help the person who's laying the complaint decide whether they wish to go forward or not. And if the person does wish to go forward with a complaint, they of course do so. But then way the complaint can be coordinated and sent to the National Investigation Service.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Brigadier General. You had said right off of the bat that your office is entirely independent, and yet you do report to the Vice Chief of Defence Staff, who, of course, then reports to the Chief of Defence Staff. What happens in a case where those are the accused? Who do you report to if those are the accused?
I'm sorry. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. If there's an allegation against the Vice Chief of Defence Staff of the CDS, then being independent from the chain of command, the investigation takes place as it would anybody else, regardless of rank or status.
So you don't have an obligation to report at that point, or?
being independent, I don't have an obligation to report.
Okay. One of the things that we heard in previous testimony from Stephanie Raymond was that she tried to go forward with complaints on several occasions, and she didn't receive any of the information about her own case. And in fact, she heard in the hallways her case being discussed by her commanding officer and by others involved, but not directly to her. So can you explain why that would be the case, why that would happen?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Certainly from my perspective, what I can speak to is that information regarding to a complaint referred to the military police, we have our own systems to protect that information, and access to that information or investigative details is only allowed to members of the military police. And it's important for us to protect that information for the integrity of the investigation and the due process.
So how would her commanding officer have found out about that information? And I think that you mentioned that you do report to commanding officers, correct? You had said to COs?
No, I do not report personally to commanding officers.
So how would that commanding officer have known? How would they have found out?
It depends sometimes how the complaint, if the reporting was made to the chain of command, then sometimes we receive complaints to the military police that were first disclosed to the chain of command, and then the complaint is referred to us. But from the point that the information enters into the military police responsibility, we have our own systems to manage that information, and we protect that information to ensure the integrity of the process, and integrity of the investigation, and the due process.
So I'm concerned because we've heard a great deal about the toxic culture that exists, the fear to report because there ultimately will be retribution. There will be some form of punishment or singling out or forcing a lot of these women, as we've seen, to eventually have to give up their entire careers. So how is it that you speak of all of this independence, this protection of complainants, and that independence, but that actually isn't the case on the ground? How do you explain that?
Certainly, my priority for me is, from a police perspective, when a complaint is made, is to offer victim support, to ensure the integrity of the investigation, and then to ensure due process for all involved. We have our own victim services program, and like I indicated, we're staffing it with full-time civilian positions. So we're gonna work on standard and policy. We'll develop and get better at it because we care about victim support, and we know it's an important part of our process. From a victim perspective, one of the role of the victim services is to keep them informed of the investigation, the process, and even court processes. And also we look at our orders, and we have proactively embedded in our orders the provision of Bill C-77 and some of the elements of the Victim Bills of Right, and it's in our new Order of Victim Services program. So we have entered those obligations that will come with Bill C-77 into our orders from a proactive perspective. And those obligations are to keep victims informed of the process. The victims have a voice into the process, and they understand each step of the process, from the time that a complaint is lodged and to the time of the court processes.
So what I'm trying to understand, though, is there is a significant disconnect between and having all those processes in place, ensuring the independence of your office, your officers, those who investigate. That's obviously that's key, and yet that's not happening. So or it hasn't happened in the past. There are so many examples that we have that it hasn't. So if that's the case, how do you see going forward to better that?
I'm sorry, that's your time. Now we're going into our second round of questions with 5 minutes for Miss Alice Lab.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witness for being here today. I'd like to continue on that, if I could. We've heard from the commander of CFNIS and now from you, and it feels as though you want to leave the impression with us that everything is working as it should. The system is effective. Those who have perpetrated sexual assault, sexual misconduct, abuse of authority are independently investigated, charged, and held accountable commensurate with the seriousness of the offense that they've committed. But we have the allegations surrounding General Vance, Admiral MacDonald, Admiral Edmondson, the other victims who have come forth, showing us that there is a pattern over a number of years where that may very not be the case. Can you confirm for us today that it's your position that everything is working exactly as it should and that there is no accountability on your part, that anything since May 2018 should have been done differently?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I can't speak to the whole system in place, but I can speak to what I know is the military police group. And from a perspective, you mentioned independence. I am functionally independent from the chain of command. So when we receive information and we investigate independently from the chain of command. I do not report details of active investigations to anyone in my role as Provost Marshal related to policing duty and functions. We've made some changes in the process. We made changes into our victim services program with the creation of the SORT team is one example as a direct result of the Deschamps report to increase capability and knowledge and expertise in investigating sexual criminal offenses. So we are a learning organization, and we've made some changes in policies and program. But from an independence perspective, I can assure you that our investigations are conducted independently.
So your recommendation to this committee is that no changes, no accountability, no structural review of any kind with respect to the Provost Marshal and the police forces of the Canadian Forces need to occur because everything is working exactly the way it should, and we don't need to address it in any way.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So I've had the opportunity to discuss with Justice Fish a few weeks ago, who's conducting an independent review of the National Defense Act. And I've shared with him some perspective to reinforce MP independence in the legislative framework. I'm looking forward to his recommendation in his important work in reviewing the National Defense Act.
So this committee doesn't need to make any recommendations because another body is doing so?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. No, what I'm saying is that Justice Fish was doing a review of the National Defense Act and aspects of military policing and the legislative framework pertaining to the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal. And I've shared some perspective with him that the legislative framework reinforces MP independence.
So if we could go back to investigating the Chief of the Defense Staff, someone brings a rumor to you or to your organization. Please, can you walk us through the process of how you would address that allegation without a complaint, a rumor, possibility of wrongdoing?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So first of all, we would receive the allegation in the complaint, and you say it pertains to the Chief of Defense Staff?
Yes.
Okay, so that allegation would be referred to, if it refers to me or the CFNIS, then an assessment of the allegation would be made, and then if the allegation or the information meets the threshold, then an investigation would be launched.
And then
That's the end of your time. Now we're going to Ms. Sidhu for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for joining us today, General. I hope that the testimony we hear in this committee will guide us and the government as it works to reform the armed forces response and reports to assault. General, your office began a review of cases that were initially deemed unfounded. What are some of the important recommendations that have been highlighted by the external review team so far?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So I don't have in front of me the specific recommendation, but broadly the recommendation was on some policy, on some training also for the investigators, but it certainly validated some of the things we were doing, like trauma-informed care, and that was important. There was also a few recommendations more on what to train and what to look for in some of the cases. And then those recommendations were made to the CFNIS, who was that were referred to him, and then he would certainly consider those and implement them.
As the follow-up, General, can you clarify what type of training is given to the officers so they are able to appropriately handle reports of sexual assault and survivors of this trauma?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So when CFNIS members come into the unit, they go through a 1-year internship program, and then they do take some foundational training that every CFNIS member takes. They will do an MP investigator course that lasts about 6 weeks at the academy, and then there's various sexual investigation course, interviewing techniques. And this year, what the commanding officer started to do in his indoctrination, where they take a week where they take all the new NIS investigators, is they provided some training on trauma-informed interviewing with the intent of rolling out to all the NIS investigators, because we see value into that training. And sorry.
In addition to having representatives from the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces, the external review team also includes a survivor advocate and a victim service representative from the Sexual Misconduct Response Center. What are some of the benefits of having victim advocacy experts on the review team? What feedback have they provided?
I don't have the specific feedback, but from my perspective, it was highly valuable, and the NIS welcomed the comments, because the victim advocates also help us understand things from the victim perspective, and they certainly provide some what's the word? So une réalisation of how a victim feels and some of the needs of a victim. And it certainly also helped on trauma-informed interviewing, understanding how to interview victims that from a trauma perspective. And certainly as we move the victim services program forward with a new coordinator and manager who's been hired and will start next week, I certainly would look at consulting externally to SMRC or other organizations to really integrate best practices into our program.
Thank you. And how do agencies under your supervision collaborate with the Sexual Misconduct Response Center?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Certainly, as I explained earlier, we have an MP liaison officer embedded with SMRC. So certainly there is a link there, but we've certainly exchanged best practices with them, and we are in regular contact with the SMRC.
Madam Chair, do I have more time?
30 seconds.
Okay. Any other recommendation, General, you want to give this committee?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. A recommendation, I think it's I guess the committee, but for me, to better explain the role of the military police and defense community and communicate more on what we do and our independence to break down barriers of reporting.
Merci. Madame Larouche, 2,5.
Madame Larouche, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Provost Marshal, for being here with us today. When we listen to you, there are really no serious problems, and your department can respond to and immediately follow up on all complaints from what we hear. So, in your view, where is the problem? So, in your view, where do the problems lie? For example, if the victim had come to see you in the recent case, would she have been able to proceed with her complaint? Anyone, as I explained, can lay a complaint with the military police. We would have assessed the complaint, and we would have determined whether an investigation was warranted. What percentage of sexual misconduct complaints do lead to action? You talked about the coding. You talked about the ways of establishing whether a complaint is properly founded or not. So is it a low percentage that goes ahead? What obstacles prevent most complaints from not ending with a recognition of guilty with regard to misconduct? Well, the coding I was talking about is not necessarily an outcome of a judicial process. As a police service, we carry out investigations, we assess the facts, we assess the evidence, and we lay charges. The result of the judicial process or legal process is somewhat outside my area of expertise. For example, why a prosecutor or a court would make a particular decision and would reach a decision of not guilty. That is outside my area of expertise.
Listen, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much. You said that there are, of course, issues with the system. You want to make better the ease to report for women to know the system better, that there is that independence, that they have those options. Again, I kind of want to return to, because we heard it so recently and it was so powerful, the testimony of Ms. Raymond here in this committee. She said the only reason she was able to actually get proper justice was by going outside of the military. Are there ways that you can help better facilitate, if that's the case, better facilitate victims to go that route?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So a victim can make a complaint to any police services, civilian police or military police. And then at that point, if it's made to the civilian police, then they would go through the same process than we do to establish jurisdiction and who would investigate. But a victim can make a complaint to any police services that they wish.
Are there cases where you would advocate for that, or would you involve yourself in that way? If they've come to you first, would you advocate for them to follow another path?
It's difficult for me because every case is different, and then there would have to be investigative assessment and discussion within the investigative team as jurisdiction is assessed.
And just to follow up on what my colleague was trying to get to in terms of, and we come back to my questioning on the fact that you report to the Vice Chief of Defense Staff and the Chief of Defense Staff ultimately. So if there's a complaint against them and you find something inappropriate, where do you go with that? I mean, obviously you report to them, so where do you go with that after that, if you're truly independent?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. But as there's ongoing investigations, I would refrain from commenting on that matter.
So there's
All
no.
right, and now we go to Ms. Alislav, and we will give 2.5 minutes each, Ms. Alislav and then Ms. Zahid.
Thank you very much. I would like to get an answer. We're not looking for information on the ongoing investigation, but if a CDS were found through your investigation that charges needed to be laid, how would that happen?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. That determination would be made at the end of the investigation.
Yes, and so by whom and how would they be laid?
The decision to lay charges is made by the CFNIS.
So they wouldn't need to inform anybody. They would lay charges against the CDS on your authority?
The CFNIS is a charge laying authority.
Okay, and so they wouldn't have to inform anybody. They could just go ahead and do it.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Depending on the outcome, and generally depending on the outcome of investigations, some aspects of the investigation will become public. So, for example, charges laid after an investigation, some details become public.
Yes. So, but the charges would be laid by your organization without informing, or because you're independent, you wouldn't need to inform anybody. You could just lay charges on the CDS if your investigation had justified that to occur.
The CFNIS is an independent charging authority, and they do not need to ask permission to do so.
And who audits the CFNIS to make sure that the investigation was conducted and that the appropriate actions were taken and that the allegations were reviewed appropriately? Who audits that to make sure that they were independent, it was fully investigated?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So as explained before, regardless of rank or status, it's the same process. So we will ensure that there's a full...
That's not what I ask. You need to check. So who double checks to make sure, regardless of rank or process, that it was conducted appropriately? Who audits?
As I stated before, investigations go through a rigorous vetting process through the supervisory chain. And the same process applies to everyone.
But sometimes
regardless
mistakes
of
are
rank.
I'm sorry, that's the end of your time. We're going to Ms. Zahid for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Brigadier General Trudeau, for appearing before this committee and providing your input as we continue this study. My first question to you is that in 2018, you launched the Sexual Assault Review Program, which serves as an open and transparent case review mechanism of the unfounded sexual assault files investigated by the Canadian Forces Military Police. So the Sexual Assault Review Program uses an external review team to review its cases. Why do you think it is important to have an external review team to do the sexual assault investigations?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair, because it was felt important to have an open and transparent process to come and help us review this, but certainly it was experts in the field of sexual assaults. And we wanted to learn where we could improve and get advice from external bodies to how we can better serve the community and certainly better support the victims over time.
Can you provide some details on these individuals, who they are, those who do the reviews? Are they members of the Canadian Armed Forces? You are on mute.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So those individuals, we had a member of the SMRC. We had a trauma care nurse that was from the National Defense, but she was a trauma care nurse. We had a member of the RCMP. We had a victim services advocates from Ottawa, I believe. And there was also a Crown prosecutor with experience in sexual assaults. And we had a phase of the review where we had cases involving children. And then in that case, we had a child services expert that helped us in the review of the case. So the external review team model is made that we can customize, depending on the cases we want to review, the expertise that we need to help us review the case.
I have 30 seconds. Do you provide them any training before they do the reviews, and then what kind of training?
So we provided them training on privacy because we consulted the Office of the Privacy Commissioner before undergoing this program. We give them training on the format of our police reports, because as part of the review, they have access to the police report complete. So we have to train them in some of the SOPs of the military police and how we structure our reports. And then we let them do the review and come up with advice.
I have to apologize to the committee because I don't know what I was thinking when I was looking at the clock here. We actually did have time for your full 5-minute session. So we'll go back to Ms. Alislav for 2 minutes and then to Ms. Zahid for 2 minutes so you get your full time in. Ms. Alislav.
Wow, thank you. I was wondering what was happening there. And thank you to the witness. I wonder if you could give us some information about the statistics that you keep. Do you keep a record of all of the allegations or complaints that are brought to your attention? Do you categorize them by category of the nature of the allegation? Do you keep a record of how many are referred from your organization back into the chain of command, as well as the number of cases that where charges are laid or where lesser charges are laid than what was at the beginning of the process indicated?
You're on mute.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal produces an annual report, which is publicly available. And as part of that report, there's an annex that makes public all our statistics, investigative statistics of all the offenses and the crimes that we investigate.
But even the ones that you deem are not worthy of investigation, I didn't see that information.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. But if a complaint or an allegation is referred to the military police and it doesn't meet the threshold, then we're not investigating that offense.
But so you don't keep a record of those of the number that didn't meet the threshold versus the number that did.
I believe that information would be captured in our database.
We also heard that there was a loss. There have been cases where evidence has been lost or tampered with, or charges have had to be dropped because of issues around evidence. Do you keep a record of that as well?
So our evidence, certainly there's policy around evidence, and our evidence is tracking to our records. Yes, it is.
Now to Ms. Zahid for 3 minutes.
My colleague, Anita Vandervelde will take those 2 minutes.
Very good.
Yes, thank you. And I want to thank you for being here as a witness and for answering our questions. You had mentioned in some of your testimony Bill C-77. And, I know that some are saying that it hasn't come into force yet, but there are many, many elements that are already in place. You referred to some of those. I wonder, including, of course, Bill C-77's primary objective, which is the Declaration of Victims' Rights. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how Bill C-77 is being implemented and rolled out, and what changes are being made accordingly.
I think he's frozen.
Did he hear my question?
I don't think he's still connected.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I think we lost him. Well, Clerk, I think we lost the Brigadier General.
Please suspend.
Yes, let's suspend. Professor at the Department of History at my alma mater, Queen's University, and Alan Ockros, who's a professor at the Department of Defense Studies at the Royal Military College. Each of you will have 5 minutes for your remarks, and we will begin with Mr. English.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I teach Canadian military history in the history department at Queen's University. I have also taught senior officers at the Canadian Forces College in Toronto. I served for 25 years in the Royal Canadian Air Force and the Canadian Armed Forces as Air Navigator. The Acting Chief of the Defence Staff, Lieutenant General Wayne Eyre, has stated that Operation Honour is finished and that the CAF would, quote, develop a deliberate plan to go forward, unquote. Today, I will briefly examine 4 actions Lieutenant General Eyre indicated would be part of that plan. An external review of the CAF and its culture, increased training, improved recruiting, and reestablishing trust where it has been broken. Justice Deschamps' 2015 external review into sexual misconduct and sexual harassment in the CAF, followed by government reports as well as numerous academic papers and presentations, have made abundantly clear the nature of the problems and their solutions. The issue now is not identifying the problems with another external review, or as Lieutenant General Eyre put it, listening and learning, but in actually addressing the problems. Lieutenant General Eyre said that the CAF would increase training until there is, quote, a constant drumbeat of reminding our members what is right, what right looks like, unquote. However, an evaluation of CAF training on inappropriate sexual behavior by the Auditor General in 2018 reported that, quote, We found that the chain of command delivered briefings and training that did not increase members' understanding of how to respond to and support victims, but instead created confusion, frustration, fear, and less camaraderie, unquote. These findings have been confirmed by personal accounts of some current and former female CAF members. They stated that training was often delivered by unqualified senior members of the unit who used it to criticize aspects of Operation Honor and to blame female unit members for causing trouble or undermining unit cohesion. Lieutenant General Eyre also reiterated past CAF commitments to improve recruiting processes to increase the number of women in the CAF. The latest target being that females should make up 25% of the CAF by 2026. However, a 2016 Auditor General report noted that with no targets or strategy, the CAF was unlikely to achieve this goal. The report also documented long-standing failures in the CAF recruiting and retention system dating back almost 20 years, and that the CAF has failed to correct. Finally, Lieutenant General Eyre said that new efforts would be made to, quote, reestablish trust where it has been broken, unquote. However, one of the goals of Operation Honor was to, quote, win back members' trust, unquote. With Operation Honor, the CAF tried to address sexual misconduct in its ranks through, quote, the direct, deliberate, and sustained engagement by the leadership of the CAF and the entire chain of command, unquote. Recent revelations about the sexual misconduct of some senior CAF leaders suggest that they have forfeited the trust of their subordinates and will therefore be unable to make future change without effective external oversight. In conclusion, the actions that need to be taken to address sexual misconduct in the CAF are well known. However, to be successful, they must be subject to sustained and active oversight by a truly independent body. That body should be external to both the Department of National Defense and the CAF, as DND's senior leadership includes many retired former CAF members who were part of the problems in the past. While detailed planning and implementation of solutions to problems of sexual misconduct in the CAF must involve CAF members, their actions should be subject to the scrutiny of an independent body with the power to require compliance with its directives. Over 5 years, the CAF's leaders were unwilling or unable to deal effectively with sexual misconduct in its ranks. Therefore, external oversight is the next logical step to take to confront this issue. Otherwise, the CAF is about to head down the same path to failure that it has followed in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we go back to Mr. Ockros, I see the Brigadier General is back. Thank you so much. We lost you there. I would give you the opportunity for a final comment in response to Ms. Vandenbeld's question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you please repeat the question?
Yes, sure. It was about how Bill C-77 is being implemented.
Bill C-77, I think, is being implemented I think it's within, I don't know the status of where it is from an implementation, but what I can say is that we've proactively included in our policies, orders, and SOPs aspects of the Victim Bill of Rights.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you very much, Brigadier General, for being with us on our panel and for answering the questions. And if you want to stay, we're going to have a very exciting discussion. We're going to go now to Professor Ockros for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and we all appreciate the joys of connectivity these days. I am speaking to you from Toronto, the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples. I've been engaged on issues of harassment in the CAF for over 40 years, both in uniform and as an academic. I see strengths and weaknesses in the current version of the movie. We know Operation Honor has not had the results intended. You want to know why. The reason has been an incomplete understanding of the issues, which has led to incomplete solutions and underpinned by an unwillingness to critically analyze certain aspects of CAF identity and culture. The first problem is that the issue has been framed as about sexual misconduct. Yes, there are CAF members who annoy people with overtures, but the key issue is not about sex. If I hit you with a shovel, you wouldn't call it inappropriate gardening. It's about power. It's about sexually and racially coded language that creates and polices social hierarchies about who is important and who is not. And the death of 1,000 cuts damages an individual's self-worth, identity, and sense of belonging. You heard last week, military sexual trauma represents a deep moral injury. The path starts to expand the framing of the problem. It acknowledges that there are cultural factors that can increase incidents of sexual misconduct. But the door is only opened very slightly. The key omission is the continued reluctance to name power and militarized masculinities. This requires a careful and critical analysis of how the military constructs the soldier, sailor, aviator, and equally the leader and commander. We need to examine the institutionalized and systemic processes that shape military identity and ask how much of one's identity do they have to give up in order to be successful in the CAF. Most of those leading the CAF have not had to think about this. Left-handed people know they live in a right-handed world, but right-handed people don't. It isn't apparent to us when the world is constructed to fit us. The CAF was a good fit for most seniors, and they continue to use terms and narratives that they believe resonate with all, but actually serve to accentuate the dominant identity, hence increase the social hierarchies, and leave some feeling isolated, ignored, or not valued for who they are. As part of analyses, I highlight a 2016 U.S. Equal Opportunities Commission report that identified 12 factors that increase the risk of workplace harassment. The CAF is at the high end for several. Significant power disparities, encouraging alcohol consumption, a young workforce, use of coarse language, single gender-dominated culture, and a homogeneous workforce. Only 2 are reflected in the current path. Proper considerations of institutional and systemic factors that create the conditions where sexualized language is used to diminish others requires the CAF to shift away from the current focus on the individual. Harassment incidents and lack of reporting are not because people haven't read the definition or don't know how to file a report. There are strong social factors that are intentionally created by the CAF that set these conditions. Addressing these factors means challenging some central tenets of the profession, things that are key to success but can create unhealthy conditions: obedience to authority, normative conformity, and group loyalty, the use of power, and the practices of judging others to see if they measure up. Finally, it's become clear that some seniors have not dealt with sexual misconduct issues effectively. There are examples of some becoming ethically mute and morally numb. But there are also CAF members living in a parallel universes. We have men who honestly do not understand how women or diverse folk navigate their career, their workplace, their teammates. They assume all others have the same experiences they do and haven't critically examined issues of privilege and advantage, have not seen how others are shunned, marginalized, or disadvantaged. They can't see the informal social mechanisms that those subject to harassment use to get the message to the idiot to stop. Seniors may hear that there was an incident in the mess, but learned that the 2 parties talked it over, settled it all. No harm, no foul. They don't recognize that the most that the offended party can hope for is a grudging apology, which leaves them still harmed, still looking over their shoulder, still carrying that moral injury. Some seniors honestly say, I've never seen incidents of sexual misconduct. That's because they're wearing cultural glasses with blinders that allow them not to see. And this is a key element of the culture change the CAF needs to embark on. My question for this committee is, what guidance are you going to provide CAF leaders to do so effectively? I look forward to your questions.
Very good. We're going to start our first round of questioning with Ms. Wong for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm so proud to be among historians because formerly as a professor, I used to teach world history and also do a lot of research on culture. So this is really like hitting home. So Dr. English, on February the 26th, you appeared before the National Defense Committee as a witness for now their recently shut down study on sexual harassment in the CAF. In your opening remarks, in that appearance, you indicated that over the last 30 years, the CAF has consistently failed to implement, quote, comprehensive cultural change, unquote. Operation Honor was the CAF's most recent attempt at such a change. In your opinion, do you think Operation Honor was a success? In what ways has Operation Honor failed? You did mention that in your opening remarks, but I would like to ask you to shed more light on that. Thank you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to be here as a historian. I'll let Professor Okra speak for himself, but he's not a historian. At any rate, that's okay. Basically, I think the main failure of Operation Honor was simply Justice Deschamps' primary recommendation was the cause of most of the bad behavior was the culture of the CAF, this toxic, highly sexualized culture, and she called for comprehensive culture change. From the very beginning, the first response was from General Tom Lawson, who was CDS at the time, and he said, I do not accept from any quarter that this behavior is part of our military culture. And that has continued right through the latest strategy, sexual response strategy, the path to dignity and respect, only calls for cultural realignment as though it's sort of minor. So I think the major failure of all these activities in the last 30 years has been that the CAF is unwilling or unable to change its culture. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, this is a question addressed to Dr. English. Are there any parallels you are able to draw between Operation Minerva and Operation Honor? Be they failures, lessons, successes, approaches, etc. This is a pretty open question, Dr. English.
Well, thanks for that. I mean, I'm a history prof. I'm used to open questions. But so Operation Minerva was part of a group of responses to what Maclean's characterized was the rape crisis in the Canadian Armed Forces in the 90s. And it was also part of the gender integration of the Canadian Forces required by the Canadian Human Rights Commission. Operation Minerva there's actually an Auditor General's, or actually a Chief Review Services report that's available still online that documents how it failed. And it's failed almost exactly the same way as Operation Honor. There was no real commitment on the part of senior leadership to carry it out. The actions were many but ineffective. There was no evaluation of it ongoing, which has been a huge problem with Operation Honor. So in the end, and it went exactly like Operation Honor, an original sort of team set up to execute it was absorbed back into the organization and downranked continuously until it just faded away. And I suggested in a 2016 report that I wrote for the Strategic Response Team Sexual Misconduct that actually if they just read the Chief Review Services 1998 report on Operation Minerva, they'd know exactly what things to avoid. I'm not sure if anybody did, but that's the short answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. English. So you noted that Operation Honor lacked, quote, a guiding strategy. Who would be responsible for creating such a strategy? Would this be something the Minister Office would be involved in? And what role, if any, do you view the Minister of National Defense playing in the establishment of such guidelines? Was there a role for the minister himself or herself in ensuring Operation Honor met its goals?
Well, my understanding of this was simply that the minister delegated that responsibility to the Chief of the Defense Staff, and the Chief of the Defense Staff actually in Operation Honor on the 15th of August 2015 directed that the Vice Chief of the Defense Staff write a strategy for Operation Honor within 45 days by the 30th of September 2015. That was never done. And without any external oversight or anyone seemed to notice internally, Operation Honor never had a strategy. And even though the CDS directed that it be written.
So, Dr. English, you also mentioned in previous testimony that leadership buy-in is essential to Operation Honor's succeeding. You also mentioned that, quote, a lack of acceptance, unquote, permeated through leadership in the CAF. So given the testimony of other witnesses, both at National Defense and here specifically the Ombudsman, it would appear that a lack of leadership, quote, buy-in and acceptance is not limited to just the CAF.
Sorry, that's your time. We're going now to Ms. Hutchings for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank both the witnesses for being here today. Your knowledge that you're bringing and sharing with us is certainly invaluable. Professor Akros, the committee is a unique opportunity to study sexual misconduct from a gender-based analysis, as well as a survivor-centric and trauma-informed lens. You've done considerable work to enhance military operational effectiveness with research on women and diversity as well. So can you share how policy and culture change on sexual assault can directly impact on operational effectiveness in the military?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess a couple of comments that I would make. One of the critical ones is the military gets everything done as a team. The first principle for any leader is to build cohesive, effective teams that work together. When we have these kinds of behaviors within teams, when team members are being marginalized, they're being shunned, they're being harmed, you cannot have an effective team. And that goes at the core of what challenges operational effectiveness. So to me, I think, we're back into the questions you're asking on, what can be done. An emphasis on building inclusive teams where every team member feels valued and they're able to fully contribute. And it goes beyond that because, again, I think one of the things we recognize as well, we know diversity within teams is a real strength. When we have different people who see things through different lenses, different eyes, bring different lived experiences, it strengthens the team. And it's a real challenge in the military because part of the professional socialization is to convert the civilian into the soldier, sailor, aviator. Part of that causes everybody to become the same and to think the same. So some of these professional socialization processes actually stunt the diversity that is essential for mission success. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you, sir. Professor English, you've researched military culture from a Canadian perspective. Based on your findings, what is a military culture and what are some of the distinctions between sexual assault in the military environment and in civilian cases? And how do we address those specific challenges? And I'd also ask you to end with, in your international approach to addressing sexual assault in the military, what have you encountered in your research? And how would you advise those examples from other international approaches inform policy changes in the CAF?
Okay, I'll try and be brief here. We could run a 2-hour seminar on that. Basically, culture tells people how things should be done. And, there's a formal culture, the rules, regulations, and whatnot, and there's an informal culture. And as someone said, culture eats policy every time. And so it's the informal culture that drives what really happens in the organization. The leaders come and they tell you what they'd like to happen, and then you hear from other people what really happens. And so that's the key, is this informal culture that really everyone learns in every organization, oh yeah, that's not really the way we do things here. So the difference between the civilian and the military culture is simply the power of the hierarchy. And the power that people have. I mean, a commanding officer has the legal right to order someone into harm's way. That's the only profession in Canada where they're allowed to do that. So it's incredible power. And as Professor Okra said, the necessity of working in teams. And I think, as Lieutenant Colonel Eleanor Taylor said, sometimes it's worse being excluded from the team than to tolerate the sexual misconduct. And sometimes that's what people do. So I think I'll stop there because otherwise I'll go on too long. I hope that helps.
It does. And do you have a comment about other international approaches to address sexual assault in the military that we could use those examples to inform policy changes at CAF?
Very quickly, we have become most closely attached to the American military culture, which American researchers have found is to be even more toxic than the Canadian military culture, and actually encourages and enables sexual assaults within the U.S. military. So they're not a very good model. And I don't know a lot about too many others other than a little bit about Australia and the United Kingdom, and their record is no better than ours. So I'm afraid I'm at a bit of a loss there.
Well, let's hope we can be leaders in this. Professor Akros, given the operational impacts of military assault, sexual assault, what are your recommendations to address the root cause of this? You've talked about the hierarchy, you've talked about power. What are your recommendations to address the root cause?
I guess a couple of comments that I would make with this. Knowledge and awareness, and this is not education, it most definitely is not PowerPoint training. It's knowledge and awareness of how people see themselves and how they see others. The part that I was talking to in my opening statement, we have too many people in uniform who assume everybody else has the same lived experience as they do. We need to start with them recognizing others experience their military careers very differently. That's my starting point. And I know time's running out, so I'll stop here.
Very good. And then we'll go to Madame LaRouche, 6 minutes.
Ms. LaRouche, 6 minutes. Thank you. Thank you both for your testimony, because you are reminding us that this issue of culture and sexual misconduct in the armed forces goes back very, very far indeed. Things have been done in the past but haven't had much impact. There's so many things to say, but first of all, Mr. Okros, you spoke about the culture, so I'd like to hear you say more on it. In Operation Honor, there's a link to dignity. How can you talk about a process to change the culture? And what do you think of the path to dignity and respect? What's your view?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I indicated, I think the key change that needs to be made, two changes that I think that need to be made. The first is, as I've mentioned, a shift to inclusion. The military operates very strongly to socialize people into a single identity. So the military needs to authorize and accept inclusive teams. The second part is more emphasis needs to be given on assessing the capacities and the effectiveness of leaders creating effective teams. We have cases where leaders are rewarded because they got the job done, and people don't spend enough time looking at what cost. We have teams that get left behind that are tired, they're broken, they're not functional. So I think part of it is holding leaders accountable for the teams they create and the team they leave behind when they move on to new positions. Thank you.
So there's this accountability on the part of leaders and seniors, but you mentioned training as well. I'd like to come back to that. In your college, Ms. Julie Slalonde came to testify before the committee. How can you explain what happened to her while she was providing training and she was subjected to disgraceful comments by the people she was giving training to? Are you surprised? Is there any attempt to raise awareness?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things that I will point out is, as a member of the Department of Defense Studies, most of my teaching is at the Canadian Forces College rather than the Royal Military College. However, I would suggest that, unfortunately, the circumstances by which Ms. Lalonde did her presentation were not well set up. I don't think it was well introduced. I don't think it was well understood. I don't think there were senior leaders in the room to ensure that it was a respectful conversation that happened. So I think there were lessons that were learned by officials at the Royal Military College on how subsequent sessions could be conducted more effectively. The second part to it was that I think some of the messages that she wanted to convey to the cadets were new to cadets. She was tackling and naming, rape myths. And at most Canadian universities, there had been very good conversations amongst students on these issues. I don't think there had been conversations amongst the cadets at RMC on these issues. So I don't think they were well positioned to listen, to hear, and to respond to them. I know subsequent to that, there have been other efforts at RMC to ensure that cadets do have a better understanding on some of these issues. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Now I'd like to put a question to Professor English. You said in your preliminary remarks, you talked about the objective for 2026. How recruitment processes can improve and how retention processes can improve. Could you please talk about that?
I based most of my comments on that on the 2016 Auditor General's report on recruiting and retention. And that's the one to look at, I think, because it goes into great detail on all the things that are broken with the Canadian Forces recruiting and retention system. It also says we've been reporting on these same problems since 2002. And they haven't been changed. And this is why I think external oversight is critical, because the forces keeps promising to change, but without any external oversight, the changes aren't made. And the Auditor General just makes recommendations. So he recommends, and nothing gets done, and nothing gets done. And right now, the latest figures I have was that in 2020, according to the target that was set in 2016, the Canadian Forces should have been up to 19% women. It's a 15.8%, say 16% now. So they're 3% behind. And with a broken system and no plan and no strategy, the Auditor General doesn't think they're going to get there. Thank you.
And now we're going to go to Ms. Matheson for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much. So in the testimony that we actually just heard in the previous session, I'm a bit concerned because with the Brigadier General from the Provost's office, there seemed to be, he consistently said that he was entirely independent, that his office operated independently from the command structure, and there seemed to be no sense of a need to change that. And yet, repeatedly, from Madame Deschamps, from all the studies that we've seen, from Auditor Generals, from you here today, you've both consistently said that independence is key. So can you comment on the disconnect that we just heard versus what we've heard this entire study and what we heard from you today in terms of that independence of the one group within the CAF that could actually lay charges, that can do those criminal investigations on sexual misconduct?
Madam Chair, if I may start, and I'll let my colleague join in. The comment that I would make, and based on the testimony that was given by the previous witness, I think we need to recognize that these things don't happen in isolation. Incidents, when they occur, there commonly are other witnesses. There's people that friends talk to. When an individual makes a decision to formally lodge a complaint, it can commonly be with the chain of command. So there's knowledge and awareness of an incident prior to it going to CFNIS and a formal investigation. We also recognize once investigations get started, despite the caution that investigators may give to individuals, they, as a result of an interview, may be talking to others. So one of the problems in all this is the rumor mill. These things can never remain completely isolated. So I wouldn't suggest that the issue is the internal processes. I know a lot of work is being done by the military police to ensure they conduct very professional investigations, but I think we need to recognize they don't happen in a vacuum. And I think the broader context of colleagues and superiors who may have some knowledge, who are prepared to talk about things. I would say, quite honestly, we've seen over the last 3 months, there's been significant speculation in the public domain, about senior officers, despite the fact that no investigation is yet to be completed. So we need to put it in a broader social context, and we go back to culture. So part of the culture needs to be a respect for confidentiality. We needs to be people that recognize it's inappropriate for me to say anything. When I hear a juicy rumor, I'm not going to pass it on to my friends and post it on Facebook. It's that kind of respect for colleagues that needs to be built into the culture so that we can minimize the harm that is created when people speak up and speak out. Thank you.
I'll just very briefly say that I think you have to remember that everyone in the military culture is influenced by this informal culture, including the military police officers, including the military judges, the prosecutors, everyone. And there's so much discretion in the system, in the rules and regulations, commanding officers' discretion, investigators' discretion, supervisors' discretion. And if their discretion is influenced by their own lack of belief in the problem, then they're going to exercise that discretion in ways that may be harmful to the complainant. Thank you.
Ultimately, so the fact that they are within the command structure entirely, even though they say they're entirely outside of the command structure, they cannot be separated. That's what you're...
Well, they may be outside of the command structure, but they're not outside of the culture. And they live and breathe in that culture, and they get ahead or don't get ahead in that culture. And that, I think, is more influential than any sort of formal wiring diagrams or chains of command.
One of the things that we heard from Ms. Stephanie Raymond was the belief and the understanding that those who rise up through the ranks, they become very popular, they are protected, they are given a great deal. We talked about power today, but that power just continues to grow. And that's seen from the bottom, right through to the very top. The idea that someone as CDS has, one would expect, the most power, the most popularity, and that those around him, or hopefully one day her, him, are protected entirely. Can you talk about? You spoke that there are the former and the informal cultural influences. Leaders are supposed to speak to at least the formal, but when they don't take that responsibility, what occurs? And I'd like to expand that actually to political leaders not taking responsibility for some of these actions. If you could comment on that, both of you.
Well, I can start with the formal and informal, and I'm not an expert on political leaders, so you might want to talk to political scientists about that. I'm just going to speak about the military. But in the military, there's also formal and informal leadership, and a lot of the attributes that popular leaders exhibit are ones that conform to the culture. So if you've got a toxic, misogynist culture, people that behave that way get ahead and are admired. So until the culture's changed, unfortunately, those same kinds of influences, people look up to these leaders. And, we've had lots of examples where the survivors are intimidated, people admire for right or wrong reasons the leaders, and they follow them. And so until the culture's changed, not much else is going to change, I don't think.
All right, and then we'll go to our second round of questions, beginning with Ms. Sahota for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses as well. You talked about changing the culture, so my question is in line with that. We have heard through the media and testimony at this committee and National Defense Committee that unresolved sexual misconduct and abuse of authority allegations remain against serving generals and admirals. You cited the overwhelming power of the hierarchy. In your opinion, Dr. English, would future CAF culture change attempts be at risk if current senior leaders are not held accountable for past offenses?
Well, that's a tricky one. I think I'll speak more to culture change, and I think certainly one of the key ways to deal with culture change is to change the demographic. That's the idea of bringing the number of women up to 25% and to change leadership. It's a long process, and the armed forces is very good at short, sharp activities and not very good at long-term activities like culture change. And that's why I think you need an external body so that, to hold these leaders to account. So if they say one thing and do something else, the external body should be right there saying, oops, sorry, you didn't do that. And then be able to tell them, not just be able to report it and have them say, oh, sorry, we didn't really mean that, we'll try again. So I think, that gets back to, if you've got effective, independent, external oversight with authority to actually compel change, then you might get somewhere.
Okay. Dr. English, this question will be for you as well. You mentioned in previous testimony, and I'm picking up from where my colleague MP Wong left off, that, quote, leadership buy-in, unquote, is essential to Operation Honor succeeding. You also mentioned that, and quote again, lack of acceptance, unquote, permeated through leadership in the CAF. Given the testimony of other witnesses, both at National Defense Committee and here, specifically the Ombudsman, it would appear that a lack of leadership and, quote, buy-in and acceptance is not limited to just the CAF. The Minister of National Defense has staunchly refused to accept any responsibility relating to the endemic culture of sexual harassment in the CAF, and has gone so far as to deflect blame onto bureaucrats, which is in stark contradiction to other testimony. Dr. English, how important was it for the Minister of National Defense to, quote, buy in to the recommendations made by Justice Deschamps and be part of, quote, guiding strategy as it relates to Operation Honor? What issues arise when the minister refuses to accept responsibility for failures under his watch?
Well, I'm going to speak as a historian, and we deal with the past, and I'm not very good at the present. So you might want to ask my students in 20 years when all the documents are available. But I mean, one of the methodologies of historians is to deal with the complete record. And unfortunately, what we often have right now are incomplete accounts of what's happening. So, but let me just go back to the one time when there really was effective change in the Canadian Forces with external oversight, and that was after the Somalia affair. And there, the minister took direct involvement in making change, and he got a lot of resistance from the senior leaders of the armed forces. And he brought in a ministers' monitoring committee, some of whom had been members of the Somalia Commission, and they advised him directly, and he directed change. So from a historical example, whether it's the minister or some other external body, and maybe that's why it should be external entirely from DND, someone with an interest in making change historically has been the kind of person that's made the change.
What we've seen so far from the top, including the minister, are platitudes and policies that don't attack the root cause of sexual misconduct. The minister is, of course, in charge and has the management of the entire Canadian Forces. Could you comment on what should be done at that level, the most senior management level? Yes, Dr. English.
Oh, that's for me. Oh, okay. Well, again, I'm a historian, and we just don't have enough information on that. For a historian, again, you might want to talk to a political scientist, but for me, that's current affairs, and I don't do current affairs. Sorry.
All right, and then we'll go to Ms. Vandenbeld for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. And I just want to start by echoing the role of historians. I did do my doctoral studies with Dr. Berkeson and Dr. Granitstein back in the day. So I'm a historian myself. But my first question actually is to Professor English. You've talked a lot about the chain of command and about power disparities, and we have heard testimony in this committee that it is really hard. It is incredibly complex when you are reporting a sexual assault when the perpetrator, the aggressor, is a superior. And I wonder if you could give some of your recommendations that would allow for a better environment for people to be able to come forward.
That's one that I'm not expert on, but let me just say that this is not a unique problem to the armed forces. There have been many examples in the news where there have been other organizations where people are bullied, harassed, prevented from coming forward. And I think if the key in this is to have a body that's completely external to the organization to make a complaint to. And if you can do that, and that body can actually influence what's going on in the organization, then I think you've got a way of making change. But that's about all I'll say on that. Thanks.
I'll put that same question to Professor Okros.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would offer two comments. One of the things I think is important to do a bit of a differentiation between formal investigations of sexual misconduct, and I think there's been some clear recommendations suggesting that there needs to be greater independence in those processes. But the other part we've talked about is the culture piece. And I think putting in place mechanisms to allow members, and particularly junior members of the military, to flag there's something wrong here. Whether that's whether it's toxic leadership, a poisoned workplace, an unhealthy work environment, I think giving people an opportunity to flag there's something that isn't right here, come in and take a look at it. That I think gets at the root causes and actually can get us to the stage where we can prevent the harm in the first place. Then there's other things that can be done, I think, that can increase the confidence of victims to come forward and report. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Okros. And how important is it to have an independent body of trauma-informed counselors who can advise the victims, the survivors, through the reporting process?
If I could, Madam Chair, I think those individuals are critical, and I think it was mentioned in the previous testimony. I would suggest it's not only supporting the victims. This is part that I think is critical of the education program that is required across the military. Again, my comment on people that have become ethically numb and morally mute, they're not aware of the consequences of trauma. They don't understand where people are living and what they're dealing with. So I think there's a significant education program down through the chain of command to sensitize people so they understand the harm and the damage. It's why I refer to it as a moral injury. That I think is an important part of education that really needs to be conducted.
I was very interested in what you said in your remarks about what is a good soldier or good sailor, good aviator. What makes a good leader or a good commander? What are the characteristics and traits? And that goes to how do we define things like strength and bravery? I wonder if, we hear too often things like, well, he's a womanizer, but he's a good soldier. That you cannot be both of those things. So how do you make a culture where the characteristics that define the good soldier are exclusive of things like the kind of behaviors that we're talking about?
Madam Chair, if I could start with that one. I would point out, and both Dr. English and I are quite familiar with the volume on duty with honor, and there was a conscious reason why the word honor was connected in there, because the concept there, it's not sufficient to get the job done. It's not sufficient to do your duty. You must do it in a way that earns honor. And I think, unfortunately, in some parts of the CAF, that message has been disconnected. I think an emphasis, the recognition, the CAF serves Canadians. And at the end of the day, it's Canadians who have to be looking at their military with pride. And I think one of the things that this committee and Parliament as a whole can do is help express the will of Canadians in terms of what they are expecting from their military. And I believe that Canadians expect their military to earn honor. And that was one of the key messages that I would want to communicate.
Very good. And now to Madame LaRouche, 2.5.
Ms. LaRouche, 2.5 minutes. Thank you once again to both our witnesses for being here today to provide a historical context to issues of misconduct in the armed forces. Mr. Cross, you talked about militarized masculinity. Could you please elaborate on that subject and how you perceive it?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think, as we know, masculinities and patriarchy are ways in which many societies operate, and they create systems and structures that privilege men and cause challenges and problems and discrimination against women. The reference to militarized masculinities is that this is practiced in very significant ways within a military context. Again, it goes to the things we've been talking about, the construction of the prototype ideal soldier, the way in which leadership and command is exercised, the way in which power and privilege are accrued and practiced. These are different and unique in a military context. And what the extensive literature in this domain tells us is we need to challenge these. We need to have fundamental changes. This starts with those who've been accruing these privileges earning the self-insight and the self-understanding about who they have become and how that's influenced themselves and the way they see the world. And my quick comment I'll make is the military is one of the least self-reflective professions of all. When we look at many other professions, medicine, certainly organized religion and others, practitioners are constantly encouraged to reflect on how their professional practice influences how they see the world. That would be a helpful thing for the military to engage in a fairly systematic way. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're on mute.
Oui, voilà. Alors, j'aimerais donc, comme je
As I said, you talked about quality of opportunity and 12 factors, that there are 12 factors that reduce equal opportunity for men and women. So it's more difficult for a woman in the armed forces to feel protected.
Yes, and now we'll go to Ms. Matheson for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Professor Elkers, I didn't have a chance to hear from you on my question previously, talking about those different forms of leadership, the formal versus the informal, what we need to see, and I think that you have done an incredibly wonderful job of really outlining the different privileges and the powers. I think it's a bit ironic that an institution of privilege and power like Parliament is trying to investigate that sort of military side. To get better at the responsibilities. But if you could talk about that leadership that's required from bottom to top. And I had mentioned, as did my colleague, Ms. Sahota, about the requirements of political leadership as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll speak to two parts. Again, when I was in uniform, I was responsible for the team that developed the current leadership doctrine, so I know it quite well. It was developed in 2003, 2004. At the time, we did seek to inform it by gender perspectives and gender understanding, but I will say it's incomplete. I think we look at the leadership literature these days, work that's being done on authentic leadership, inclusive leadership, character-based leadership, on understanding the gendered nature of differences in leadership, both in terms of how leadership is enacted and how diverse people respond to leadership. I think there's a lot of work that can be done in those domains. From there, and I quite honestly, I would say, I think this applies, for those that occupy, senior office and hold the privilege of serving in public office. I think there are updates and changes. We have got traditions that continue to get repeated. The last quick comment that I'll make is most of us learn how to exercise leadership by watching people doing it as we are developing in our careers. When the only role models that you can see are men performing highly masculine forms of leadership, it's no surprise that both men and women growing up in that system replicate those models of leadership. I think the Canadian Armed Forces is working very diligently to develop and promote not only women as leaders, but those that lead in different ways. And I think that's going to be an important thing that needs more attention and more work on it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Excellent. Now we'll go to Ms. Shin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to both witnesses for joining us today. As a former English teacher, I really appreciate the way you're approaching this issue. Throughout the questioning in my committee and observing also what's been happening with the Defense Committee, as you know, or you may not know, the Liberals have shut down further discussion in the Defense Committee, and that is a little, for me, that is concerning. What I wanted to address with you both today is we're having these conversations because there's obviously a cultural problem that is re-traumatizing women and others who are vulnerable in these kinds of settings. And nothing's really there's been no shift. And I'm glad you're talking about cultural shift and how that happens really on the unofficial culture side. Now, when I was speaking to the Minister of Defense in a previous meeting, I kept coming back to how can there be a cultural shift if there's a lack of honesty and owning up to responsibility. And I think there's an opportunity here as we're having these very important discussions, just as when a person has cancer and you go through surgery, they go through surgery and that cancer is removed, that tumor is removed and they're sewn back up, that cancer is removed so they have a better chance of survival. When these things are being aired out and exposed, there's no point in having these discussions if that tumor won't be removed and this thing gets sewn back, that cycle won't be broken. So I think there's many opportunities here for the parties who are responsible for this to own up. So my question is, as historians, I know that you study history so that we don't repeat history. That's part of, I think, the value of studying history is so that the culture today doesn't repeat that. Can you speak into what it might look like for the leadership of this country, whether it's the defense minister or the prime minister, on how they could be more responsible in this process to be just humbling themselves, to break this cycle and bring that cultural shift right from the top for both of you? Thank you.
I was going to defer to the behavioral scientist because as a historian, it sounds like current affairs to me, but just the metaphor I would use is if you've got a malaria outbreak, it's fine to treat the victims of malaria, but until you drain the swamp and clear away the mosquitoes, you're going to keep having to deal with the problem. And I think this is the problem that's happened with Operation Honor and its predecessors, is they haven't gotten rid of the cause of the bad behavior. And until that's done, not much is going to change. Thanks.
Madam Chair, the only comment that I think I would make with that is I've heard a couple of witnesses here and in other committees making assertions or allegations of assuming blame in the middle of something that is yet to be finalized and decided on. I would suggest that it's important for people to be aware of the importance of making sure that, for example, in the present time, investigations are completed, and realistically, as others have said, and it's just 700, I think with the communication that they sent out, I think what members of the Canadian Armed Forces are looking for is for Parliament to provide some advice and some direction on what Canadians are expecting from their Canadian Armed Forces. And I think we're all looking forward to the results and the reports that are submitted from both the committee, because the military can benefit from informed guidance, and hopefully the committee can produce that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Do I have time for another question?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay. So very quickly, what would educating those who are engaging in that sort of toxic masculinity culture, how could they be taught to understand the trauma that a woman goes through so they don't repeat these kinds of offenses?
Very briefly, I can, Madam Chair. There have been, and there was a reference previously, General Eyre has referred to the listening phase, and I'll disagree with my colleague slightly. I think, and it started last summer as the Black Lives Movement got forward, I think senior leaders have recognized they have not been hearing diverse voices, and they've not been hearing of the experiences of many members across the military. I know they are seeking now to reach out and listen to them, including with the Defense Women's Advisory Organization and others. And I think more work that can ensure that there's a constant mechanism for voice so that senior leaders can hear from particularly those who don't have power in the institution, that will be a critical thing to ensure that going forward, they don't get disconnected from what some people are experiencing.
Very good. And now our final 5 minutes to Ms. Vandenbeld.
And thank you very much for talking.
You'll have to put your microphone down, I think.
I'm sorry, I didn't think there was going to be another question, so I lifted it. My apologies. My questions are for Dr. Okros, and I'm very glad that you talked about the kind of conversations that are happening right now, the consultations, the advisory groups, and the consultations with survivors and those impacted at the highest levels, because I know that from the beginning, Operation Honor was just a starting point, and it's a constantly evolving series of things, including recently the Path to Dignity and Respect on Culture Change. We heard earlier today about Bill C-77, which implements a victim's declaration of rights. We've also heard about a review of all of the unfounded sexual misconduct cases that have gone forward, and a number of different things, not least of which, of course, is the advisory panel that the minister has just put together to look at racism, discrimination, and sexism, and any other form of discrimination and bias. So if my question to you, Dr. Okros, is how important is it that this is a constantly evolving way of finding solutions? And I know we've heard that the minister is completely open to finding other solutions, other processes. The recommendations, in fact, from this committee, the recommendations from the over 30 witnesses and 25 hours that we had in the study in the Defense Committee. How important is it that this is constantly an evolving process?
Two comments, if I could, Madam Chair. First of all, definitely agree that it is important, and I definitely agree the evolving. One of the challenges of Operation Honor was there was an end state. There is no end state to the way in which Canadian societies continue to evolve, and therefore how the Canadian Armed Forces has to continually evolve. So I think these are going to be valuable and required processes going forward. The other comment that I would make is, while there are efforts to reach out, again, I will go back to, we need to understand the consequences of military sexual trauma. We need to understand that there are still individuals that are not able or willing or in a position to come forward and speak. And I think part of this needs to be reaching out to the organizations and the colleagues that they are willing to talk to have individuals bring their voices forward. Last quick one that I'll make is, we need to be very, very careful about people speaking for others. I cannot speak for members of the armed forces, and I definitely cannot speak for women. And I think that we have concerns with when people choose to speak for other groups. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you. And there's a lot of focus right now on the really overt sexual violence, the prominent cases. But how much of this goes down to what you talked about in terms of the signals that people give to one another about power, how they diminish using language? And I've seen it here in politics as well, where people will refer to me in media or in public by my first name rather than my title. And in what way does that kind of, those signals, those subconscious ways of indicating diminishing somebody's status, in what ways do we need to address that in order to be able to get to the point where we're preventing all of this kind of behavior in the first place?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, two quick comments. Again, this is part of self-insight and self-understanding, and I think the more that we can do to facilitate people, and I will say I'm the best representative on the screen, old white men like me in particular need to really open up our eyes and start learning. But we also need to look at customs and practices that reinforce these things. Simple example is visible in this committee, speaking order and length of time for questions, signals a power hierarchy. And we need to be thinking about what is the message sent about who's the least important person on the screen right now, and what are the ways that we can level those, that we can address those, that we can make sure that those who perceive they're the least important are still empowered to speak up and speak out. It's complex. All organizations, all institutions practice it. It requires open communications. And the most critical thing I go back to is, it needs those who have got the weakest voice to be able to be heard the most. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very, very profound. That final question, how urgent is this?
This is urgent. We have people who are still hurting. We have members internally within the military. It's been stated they have lost trust. That needs to be rebuilt with urgency. But Canadians need to have confidence in their military, and need to have confidence that when particularly young women, young men, and people of diverse identities choose to serve Canada in uniform, that they're going to be treated with respect and they're going to have a good, full, meaningful career. That needs to be something that needs to be communicated effectively. Thank you.
Well said. I want to thank both of our witnesses for excellent testimony today, and assure all the members of the committee that you are all very important and you will all get precisely the amount of time you deserve. Now, is it the pleasure of the committee to adjourn? Seeing that it is, this meeting is adjourned. I'll see you Thursday.
Thank you all.